Eskerma agus fáteach in de chuine seo an na chóla gáláte an na seomar na cóna agus tro Microsoft Teams. Agus mar táise sin a chuinú nu go hofigal begynnem keine chud Nigel Scott Carriage agus vanna ofig Connolly gan na chóla son faske jeicblin na figet. Ha Geolge Nigel gáláte an de leod híid an na néidir agus am smuk me gama imimechigai a chainach le minach de hagad. Tá seo na rast. Tapleis. Stáisi sin a choniu iorimi a chónliche donnoche macanéis trádacha le facail úni.
Oh, Heavenly Father, we give you thanks this afternoon for giving us the opportunity to be gathered here in the chamber and online as we come to the end of another year for the last Comhairle meeting. And it gives us a time to reflect on the past and have a vision for the future. And Lord, at this time we give thanks for the blessings that you have bestowed on this Comhairle for the last 50 years under the early leadership of the late Reverend Donald Macaulay and Father Callum MacLellan, and the direction that you provided for them to improve the heart for so many from the bud to bara in infrastructure, education, social care, and all the other services that have been enhanced during that period. And Lord, as we look forward to the future, to the next 50 years, we give thanks to all current members and in particular to the convener, the leader, as we move forward to what is a challenging time ahead for us, and no more so than when the Scottish Government is coming in to announce their budget just this afternoon, and we understand the challenges that we do face in the coming year and the coming 2 years. And Lord, we see that the vision that has been provided by this Comhairle is offering us the huge opportunity in renewables, with nearly £7 billion of investment coming to those islands. And Lord, that you provide us with the wisdom and the direction to make sure that the communities of the Western Isles, all the communities benefit from those investments, and in particular that the Comhairle, along with other partner organisations, will be directed by you in making sure that the benefits that do come to the Comhairle and all the islands, and in particular that we see reduced energy costs, which at this time is impacting on so many households with increased energy costs and reduced payments for winter heating allowance, when so many, particularly with young families, are having to make a decision whether they have money to heat their homes or put food on the table. And Lord, we give thanks and remember the Scott family and the excellent contribution that Nigel has done to this Comhairle for nearly 30 years, and at a particularly challenging time for the Comhairle then, and the direction it did give through the communications team and latterly as he was presenting us with papers for the Single Island Authority. And as we move forward, we see that as a Comhairle, we need to do things differently and make sure that the money that does come to the island is well spent. And Lord, at this particular time, we think of all the staff that have left us, and in particular retiring. We remember David MacLeod and the excellent service he has given to the Comhairle for many, many years, and we wish him and his family the very best in retirement. And Lord, we pray for Balan as she leaves us shortly in the beginning of the year, that we remember the excellent service she has provided to all members since she moved into that particular section of the Comhairle, and the diligence that she showed in previous posts in the Comhairle. Lord, we think of all those in our communities that are ill and are getting excellent care both at home and in care homes. And Lord, we pray that you would continue and the funding would be available to continue that service. And Lord, we pray for all the emergency services that have been so helpful in the work that they are undertaking at very, very difficult times, and that you be with them and their families during the festive season. And Lord, we pray for all the staff that are working in the Comhairle as they come to enjoy their festive break, and as a family that they would all enjoy a relaxing time, and that we remember the celebration that we are having at Christmas season. And Lord, we particularly think of the elderly and the young within our community, that we make sure that we provide all the services that are required to make sure that they are living comfortably. And Lord, we ask all those things in your name, for Christ's sake. Amen.
Papalaise, bainse mi gynnes. A chwnnu nis a clareg agus biariuting larach lína Comhairle in ei na cwnnu. Ha mi riola cws bar a hygiag mar chwys egenoch gubiachache en nais gron nach chwnnu dan Comhairle agus untache ri runyan meun a horde derd chunne nabelione agus hasin dogole chws basin faske torsok na cwnnu. Ach an raste iorimi nisha de Derek Mackay manager riolig Riolige agus tuin an láharach lebeg. Maar je oké?
Ach Gordon.
Aan de show.
Leader. Duncan McInnes, MBE. Bara agus Vapersay. Kenneth G. McLean.
I'm sure.
Yes. Kenneth is online. Ian A. McNeil.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
Are they hearing us online? Are you hearing us online?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, we can hear you.
I'm
Obviously,
sure.
you can't
We can't
hear
hear.
us.
Just Marina.
Kicked off, I.
Can they hear us?
Oh, I don't think you can hear us.
I'm still the shot.
Yeah, we thank you. We can hear you now.
Okay.
I'm also here, by the way, Kenneth McLean. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Kenneth. And Ian Archie was there. Usha Jess, Eriske agus Benavilla, Ian M. MacLeod,
I'm sure.
Susan Thompson,
I'm here.
Usha Tua, Mustafa Hussein,
Michael,
Ushan Robertson,
I'm
Naherach Paul Finnegan,
I'm sure.
Kenny M. MacLeod, Skiernan Loch, Robert Mackenzie,
Yeah.
and Angus Morrison. Skier Ug agus Carlavach, I have apologies from Councillor Ranulph Fraser. Norman MacDonald. An Tuv Siar agus Nish, John Norman MacLeod. Donald McSween. Lochatua, Donald Crichton. Have apologies from Councillor John A. McKeever. Colin McLean. Stornam Lochatua, Ian M. Macaulay. Malcolm K. MacDonald. Gordon Murray. Stornam McAjess, Ray Mackenzie. Angus McCormack. Dr. Francis Murray. And George Murray. And Skieran Rue, Norrie MacDonald. And Finlay M. Stewart. 27 members of the Comhairle present.
Tá Beluise, Maisha Mikai, agus Torsole Imri and Inisha, agus Alex Salmon. Slína Cúla, Bevalem Imre go Hordet Alex Salmon, Vasik had an Narnla Giagan and Nava, a Gish, 3 figures of Naug, van Maisha Salmon, na 4 Vinishat, na Halaba at der Davin se Schach, agus Davin se Kate Giag. Agus van was Count Party Nation and Halaba, agus Party Alabe. Slína Cúla, Bevalem Coalach in Noke, do Ben Moira, agus Gachneach, a Vunjagaif, agus a Bayoloch eth Maisha Salmon. Nigel Scott, Slína Cúla, Bevalem Imra go Nigel Scott, Ardnach Cúlachi policy agus officer Connell a vasich an Hogula Jiag an Hamin Davil se Kere Riget. Van Nigel led vi Gubbeth kan Cúla van Nuki at Jiag, Keithvige to Cook Jiag. Agus var Teichel do Goffigar agus by Harish na Leonochenshin. Van mes moor a Chummessen gesonrige nuad bedoelenich en naam. Slína Cúla bevalem het Coalach in de Nochge do wen a chlawn agus a brahad ag yn naim dilich a seo agus mar hwyd mi ag torsio gochonju ha tiol gynnaidjol a golaatje an yn neid yn y torsio an y bygan agus karsle y hwyrach. Donny McLeod, Slína Cúla bevalem ymra go hwyrdd Donny Lowdy McLeod y fasich yn rhiwla ffigyd gan namin y gys ceith ffigyd sy clwg diag. Van Maisha McLeod na chonige der skide lachstol de hiert chole Ninelan. Adder nauki a diag 3 figure te keer diag agus nauki a diag 3 figure te hoog diag. Slína Cúla bevalem coadach in de noche de geolog van je vi Claude a garden agus a garden ik een naam dulig seo. Cúneach Macaulay Bjarnarai. Slína Cúla bevalem umbrei hordet yn hwyd a rugby Cúneach Macaulay a Bjarnarai, a vasich a siachgula figyd gan nafad, a gys 3 figyd a Siar. Yn la neiga a crioch noch a turis corrid mile a baisgal a tukal aragad a sy'n ceith charnison. Hosi e clw rugby yn hosioch yn y vasit skol agus bai clwye a Morley RUFC, Gala, Rugby, Heriots agus Berrigatua. Nochge an de skippe hassing, nice hassing an de Nokia jerk keith figit. Slína Cúla bevalem coadach in nochge de geolog van je vi Caulay, a garden agus a garden, ik een naam gulig seo. 15 jaar, Slína Cúla bevalem imra gehordet, en volgens de 15 jaar barai. Ha fagal shelavash look inage groen en jij schepelen figit, maar les nach inage. Agus ne schach me jedig, maar eer nach inage. Slína Cúla bevalem goerok in de goed, gun wen vaste 9 jaar. Anne Nixuan, Slína Cúla bevalem imbrage, hoorde de wen vaste Anne Nixuan MBE, en nish ha fagal shelavash look inage groen en jij 3 blonde diag maar les nach inage. Slína Cúla bevalem goerokken, a goed gun wen vaste Nixuan. Cru hesher gyn stornawag. Slína Cúla bevalem jouwen neer goed dat cru hesher gyn helikopter Bristol aan de stornawag. A choshing duurs breed at hart voor realtis na halabe, who gather de skillen profession na skippe, agus in gaskach aan de wie jelige die cheshigen, wat doelen nog, agus a habel gies iaskan, waan droch loon. Bevalem kudjoch jouwen neer goed dat tramant McLeod in a gerrigen, waar de winch agus a choshing duurs neuf aandraag. as an glestennis sin hesergin. San Ivan to neven lig asgol a duurs neuf andra da bulachig. Duurs en kloren na geeltoch sin jelan, sin koele bevallen mialle neerke gedet gachniach, vasas le fees elan goroche choshing duurs, tacherdus no fees cultural, ek duurs en kloren na geeltoch is na jelan da meels kere diget. Maar woeien harwachel ek ieder ranjol gai fees elan doroche train, hun hoorstjen nog de guurschen na halappe. Scoline creature is duurs, fees, film, ook in halappe. Is lene koele bevallen miauwen neerke gedet scoline creature hoshing en duurs, zo'n een film is Siar aan de Rijn Arishoch. 3 giek, ook giek, ek duurs een film ook die na halappe. Caroline Tresis no Pieterana, is lene koele bevallen miauwen neerke gedet Caroline Tresis usje jazz, u hoort Anje. De duurs gluutjoch nasente, duurs nus eilsje, gary loog, zo'n hoppet harisch nablione geschachet, aan de biljesige schilderwas uur, ze gumli, aan de naif die miaren de geilsje munich. She Carolina in nien ek charloch, is Katie Pieterana, is hoekig aan de Gary Hilly, is huur die vuilem aan de Scoline kleedje. Een maand naast de regel is lene koele bevallen mialle neerke gedenne farpisch ich es ne helland in jaar gopaarst aan zijn maand naast de regels noban. Va ade moord de garpisch ich agus skoltjen is ne helland in jaar aan de farpischen goosje agus farpischen eunjach. Bevallen umrach sonrige or het Seamus Macra agus Amy ni Claude skolvig nekol. A choshing is hier duurs aan de schuin eunjach de skolden at de shiat jiek agus ook jiek. Mialle neer kujoch gachut en de koosjen unedol a choshing umedol kuur. Jespet naschen den skolchen galig da wiels keer dige de slinne koele. Bevallen mialle neer gedet aardskol voor strie wonig Jespet naschen den skolchen galig da wiels keer dige. Gianni Groich is skol galig glashu onze goors gen nog. Vi had skol en harappers dus aardskol hemisch geliespige de negen, wa koeler u aan zijn heer goorsen gen nog. Uterus push Jornwag is lene koele bevallen mialle neer gedet uterus push Jornwag, goshin duurs lesige. Post de collabert gommen post wrichting, daar wiels kede diget. Dat anje toch die ook nog in post is gedoen, een gosk, legget zijn neuk miljoen noot. Testale usje tuur, is lene koele bevallen mialle neer gedet testale usje tuur, ga je namelijk maar testale gin, na halappe, zo'n een 3 biljoen aan de stree, ik duurschen gin na halappe. Goshin testale usje tuur, saarwahas aan de mountie, kan u je terug gin na biljoenen. Duurs jaar is een duinpoor gin, agus duurs gin lunning, agus duurs araget is een duinpoor pink grapefruit gin, agus old-time gin na biljoenen. Goshin had kujoch duurs in joch jaar is een duinpoor, ik duurs een bier, is joch na geeltoch sin jelan. Duurschen bier is joch na geeltoch sin jelan flavor. Slinne koele bevallen mialle neerke gedet flavor tabi steetjes en herrig, a choshing duurs tabi na blione da wien ze kere diget. Ik duurschen bier is joch na geeltoch sin jelan. Maar ik ga mich reich in choshing tostale usje tuur nuurs zo'n een joch jaar is een tuinpoor. Bevallen kujoch mialle neerke gedet muurs kan koel, waag, lochnomatic, prawns to go, a choshing duurs bier straatje, schaar, agus kruich, agus kuan, loch pneumatige huurt 4 mollig aan zijn werkstraatje schaar. Duurschen is gebinnen halappe, slinne koele bevallen mialle neerke te stalle elan herrig. Goshin te stalle is gebinnen blione damielse kere diget. Ik duurschen is gebinnen halappe. Goshin te stalle duurschen er schon uren nog ne blione agus vuilsige baar ne blione le herrig. La Palina bí edalteach Seanach is lína cúla bhena meall necha chu tá bí la Berlína Choshingen tá bí Siar ag tua ag dúsin edalteach na halapa 10,000 sa céad a dígad. Davy McLeod is lína cúla bhhelam imra go chuir mai se Davy McLeod ceanart seileh sin cúla. Ili géagriach de céading seach go lá fiad an hamin, sin seach go nniu a Davy a bhí gubba gan na chóra an hamin ná céad diag céad fiad sa céad daithid blianarás, nó a háisí mar technolaí opalán scoiltean, ba Davy cúideach na ofig an a chóirstachaí agus príomh ofig ar a chóirstachaí agus cáinsnachan. Mus go dríach ceann seileh na córa sa gibling 10,000 sa céad diag. Is lína cúra bhhelam ar dúrach na chuú go Davy an na bhí i ligalié ag riach agus go mí blianach an sonne sláánige is na blianach na roin. Agus ma dhéireach bí sin fágalstocha rud na Siar gan himríonn go dhéireach belandscót. Ma dhéireach is lína cúra bhhelam imra go chuirte a bhain fásta belandscót. Ofig ar taich bhail ha ligalié i dríach san nuadach. Ha belan na bhí gubag an chóra bh 9 diag céad fiad sa 8 diag agus bhaid mar ofig ar taich bhail bh 10,000 sa 1 diag sin 3 blunne diag arás. Es an núine sin ha belan a bhí gymad dílas is na riach gymad cúidechol agus na taich mhór gan a bail gléad agus charóir sem mian aim chanigi nach buí cálaí dhéanú bei dhéanú chulaáils bei na cúideach mór ga bail har sin na blianachan agus bíoint an mór a cin belan agus seo strich chuún ma dhéirich fan mí belan agus bí spíing a haudring agus has sin goie go maií ar san na blianachan ar thoiseach agus sam smé go chóginn ar bosin chuúdi chéile son belan. Le mamaha hic sin an isise chunach lá robrach agus man hút mí as de hoisi sin chuniu a sin dó gáil cúséken noch an na cúspar a thuíag agus ha mé dó a gáil ag táiseach na cuniu. An náis go seo mínach a bulan ar agad bblianal na cúra agus is siad einta riránnean mún hart chun na nablionna. Agus ma ha dinge sem mé an ceiste chuúd fragaí tramadónlach ceistin sem mí ag bail. Ceist sem mí ag bail ma dhéine náis go seo. Mónliche Gordon Mulloch.
Thank you, Convener. Just a couple of questions. The Council agreed at the budget this year a savings of 1.7 million. I think it's Appendix B in the budget papers. And can I ask how much of these savings have been made?
How much
Thank you, Convener. I don't have the exact details here, but the way we treat the savings is that if they put forward, we reduce the budgets for the services that put these savings forward at the time. So in effect, whether the savings they put forward are achieved or not, we are realizing the saving from somewhere else. I don't have the detail of exactly which ones have been achieved or not, but 1.7 million have been reduced from the service budgets.
How much,
Thanks for that. It's slightly worrying that savings that we've agreed maybe aren't being carried forward and being covered by something else. But in terms of treasury management, why did the activities generate 2.1 million rather than the 1 million predicted? And why was the estimate quite far off the mark? What was the reasons for that?
Thank you, Convener. Well, when this budget was set up, it was December 2022. So interest rates weren't as high at that time. They've been high for a sustained period. Now they're still up at 5%. When the budget was prepared, the interest rates weren't at that level. And we also expected the balances that we had to invest to have gone down quicker than it did. So it's just a combination of all these factors. 1.6 million of the savings relates to investment income and interest from the SPA loan. We said at the first quarter of the year, back in September last year, that 1 million of savings would be achieved. It turns out that that's now 1.6 because of the prolonged period of interest being higher. And the remainder of that 500k is related to savings on principal and interest payments that we make to the PWLB.
Tableau how much on the progression? El Keshnik in a Baulele and a Husparasho. Should I gunter in the Molian? A guarantee a hen and nice. Tableau. Hiet Kuspart a Chlarobroch she Garchantes na Kunyu en Narnen lag an en Naver Davienus Kere Digit. Sho Shanentige, Shiguntige, Lishne Garchantes. Ja. Kuspadaga Garchantes Kunyu board Savalchoch Kornsnok. A ga je gamal er figitu la kan en having Davienus Kere Digit. Shiguntige is Garchantesen. Glema, kunt er maar. Kuspare keheth de Chlarobroch sin klarig u. Har ik jullie bij u je klarig aan de kuspar me het de klaar oprich. We gaan femel en niesig bij de huiverakke aan de wie klarig u. Oké, kom leskel hami de gol. Bakan room heen. A kuspare 3 Garchantes kun je committee op social agus board curums social te en een hoge la fee te gaan in navin Davin sekere digit issue social 90 segunde. Oké, klima. Ik ben niet ook kuspare kere de klaar oproch klaar u had ik jullie bij u je klaar aan een kuspare semi en de klaar oprich. We gaan femel naar niesig bij een huiverakke aan de wie klarig u aan de kusparsemi kunnen bouw is een homer naar loine klarig u aan de kusparsemi. Only Donald Crichton.
Thank you, Convener. Declaring into item 6 as the developer in this application is entering into a joint venture project with the Stornoway Trust, of which I am a member, and I will leave the meeting. I will leave the meeting for this item.
Leave a tabulation van je krijgen. Wel een koor bij zo'n uur klaar. Only neus McCormick.
And thank you very much indeed, Convener. I wish to declare an interest in item number 7, Battery Point Energy Storage Park, because I am the honorary president of Point and Sandvik Power, and I will leave the chamber.
Leave a tabulation van je McCormick. Geen dingen loine Derek. Geen dingen. Gewoon Callum McAlean.
As my colleague that has expressed an interest in the number 6, I'm a member of Stornoway.
De nu, als je klaar in de nu, als je me kreeg. Is het oké, Derek? Leef aan me aan. Weet je niet ook kuspar kook, is question schrijftje van jachtgeram, is lokarig na comedien, is huurdig question schrijftje Lennis hier van de gewone INT McLeod, is eerlijk weer de gewone McLeod leven gemaakt gest. Jan Harmot. Goed dat wij.
Natuurlijk goed pak de vuur kamer.
No right.
Would the convener agree that the call should allow at least one free night per week for school lets for local children? Thank you.
Da beluisteren wij zo'n mikrootje. Ha gewoon maar ha tot korm eigen naski de gewoon nog in de sculpture. Agus is sin ha mi golish gewelu kiolige paten kluie sculpture chach. Ha choden jaravig tropolis in de koele de lievelige gekunnevloch. Maar shees gewelu koele schon een policy arge. Jemer biachkige an de naifri proces siach I budget schon kokerichet agus siarichet gusabel in de groengrog agus messi en buig in een nog heuf oeligien de jeffer George woeden janu. Je really clishen. El geshelake. Tablaische. Als je klaart, agus een na gest van een groenliche Gordon moddag, agus vond ik van een groenliche moddag gest.
At the full council meeting held on the 2nd October 2024, in responding to a question, the Chief Executive indicated that the conveners had always been content to rule reports from service committees and the Policy and Resources Committee associated with the budget setting process as urgent items. Whilst convener, you did rule that reports from committees giving recommendations at its meeting on 22nd February 2023 and 20th February 2024 were urgent. If you look at the minutes of the council meetings on 22nd February 2022, 23rd February 2021, 27th February 2020, 20th February 2019, you will see that the reports from committees concerning the budget for the relevant committees were not ruled as urgent by the then convener. My question is a simple one. The Council has not met the requirements of the Council Standing Order 7, Part 10, which states, open quote, if 3 clear days' notice is not given for an item, it may be considered at the meeting if the chair of the meeting rules that there are special reasons why it is a matter of urgency. The chair must give these reasons. This item must be made known at the start of the meeting before the minutes of the previous meeting are approved, end quote. Nor has the Comhairle met the requirements in section 50B of the Local Government Scotland Act as amended. And as it's failed to comply with the law at the meetings I referred to earlier, can the Council's decision on the budget for the relevant financial years be lawful?
Tapeluisje, meisje moedig, agus san ik gewoon heen heb behoort ook al het proces, agus moog no ik garis anamiche nuad ha jaar gondes no in naisk goguni kan goed het bealu gone ersoneuntige. Ha reelt 3 lachen slaan aan met hel siegen zonrejan. Gus een 5 buil, agus een hoppel vis met dene nichen, wel eens een bjachtige et konjun koele. Han de peinken Lennis immerie. Ha fuske merkige gole edaisken koguni voor committee shadawash agus voor policy agus stores klaar oproch en land gole. Agus han klaar oproch ga eiltige koju 3 lachen slaan ronaum. Ha saljat gewel eisken koguni klarig nu kogunien nu ne mollien nu committeechen. Ha aisk koguni in 14 ton pobl ik in nun aum se jo beilat. Han klaar oproch agus na haisken de welt nu koguni in steetje in 14 koju 3 lachen slaan ron honju. Elf keshelaki.
Yep. What steps are you going to take to address the situation, taking into account the Chief Executive's own advice on the 2nd of October 2024 that items had to be ruled as urgent?
Ik me rasjukut le frakorganisation evansje modig golos. Le mamaha agus jalabachug agus sashin dult go na cús for a sias, cús for a seach gyda chlar o broch sam ein grúin jalabach a hat agus am do chante seo mas jigsing gon yn nach húsbar. Fémi glósad lo archag an y naif di ket jalabach i vi stéetje y bhain y ddefr yn jalabach i. Mae glósis bawl archag i orimi gynnyeg narchag labart gus saliad agus na hyfr yn jalabi edda fel ystéetje. Yn eisiau ffyrdd mi lienting le gnóich na cwniw reir gyna fos. Jeli gyda archir yn ei molian na hofigar. Jo bail lefrec dyn y gnas fos an y pasgan bod diwrtys jalabach i an y SharePoint. Agus un sy'n manager jalabach i fa skipper ionach lesach i dyn y hofigar y molig. Mae se agus gyfel bawl sydd y glwysyd archag i orimi cwnle fwynach cwnle lych nwynach cwnle jalabach i na cwnle. Sa sy'n gynnis dol go cws bar y sia efo chlar ubroch agus se jalabach i talif ag isgyn y lochen elan loish iortus fo yaran sia diag ar ichyd deg iach yn yalan na kia diag ceith figyd yn naig a naisg leis yn nod dofigar. Ha naisg sio siedig jarag biach na cwnle ma fiaf cho chwnlach i an y naif ri iortus sy'n cet fo yaran sia diag ar ichyd deg iach yn yalan na kia diag ceith figyd yn naig. Elienting co chwnlach i araisg mesi buach aringach y chyd gyminision realtus na halabe yn naan y laf figyd gan y lônestol da virus tri richet. Hu planichen sy'n tua gau usanish. Han niortus cydioch y siedig ket jalabach i fo hiaran iechyd y siach section i ga de gach jalabach i balle is tua town and country na kia diag ceith figyd y siach diag. Vol board iortus yn jalabi ag y chwniw ac yn yn treslag an y nolog da fi'n se ceir richet. Gynnyeg yntoche dyn y molian ansyn nasg ag yn nardofigar. Agus brini morac ni garagis rysyn nasg sio. Agus bicorum ag bail cestiwn y chwth ystau i brin edrych nasg agus mae cestiwn ti mi ac fedd ffwyn o'ch so Vorak
I believe. The report before the Comhairle today relates to a proposed development that's classed as being of national importance on account of its potential to make a substantial contribution to the UK and Scotland's climate change targets. This is one of the larger projects that has come before the Comhairle in recent times, and to give a sense of scale, the construction phase of the proposed wind farm is predicted to take 3 years to complete. The development site itself extends to 4,000 acres. The project is an environmental impact assessment application, and therefore the volume of detailed information the developer is required to submit, and we as Planning Authority are required to examine and address in our assessment is significant. And for the benefit of members in the chamber, I've brought a single copy of the application with me, which is laid out on the table at the front here. Our assessment informs the recommended view. Of necessity, the committee report is lengthy as it sets out the assessment and examination of each of the topics in the environmental impact assessment. This presentation, while also lengthy, only highlights the key matters that are either significantly beneficial or modestly beneficial or significantly adverse and taken into account in the planning balance. Consent for a wind farm in this location was granted by Scottish ministers back in 2010. That was the Comhairle wind farm. And then there was a further consent for an easterly extension and a southerly extension in 2011 and 2015 respectively. These three consents, collectively referred to as the consented scheme within the application, were not constructed, but each consent did proceed through to conditions discharge and minor works were undertaken in respect of each, and therefore each of these consents remains extant. So the planning permission remains alive for each of them. The application under consideration today is one which has been made to Scottish ministers under Section 36 of the Electricity Act, together with for consent to build a generating station and also for deemed planning permission. It is therefore Scottish ministers who will make the ultimate decision as to whether or not to grant the deemed planning permission, but it has consulted the Comhairle Planning Authority for its view on the environmental impact assessment report, as it's required to do so by the Electricity Works Environmental Impact Assessment Scotland regulations of 2017. If granted permission, the responsibility for discharge of the planning conditions and overseeing the implementation of the development in accordance with the planning conditions and any planning obligation will come back and fall to the Comhairle Planning Authority. I now pass you over to my colleague Anne Napier, who's online in Benbecula and who undertook the vast majority of the assessment work in this application, to take you through some of the detail of the application.
Thank you, Morag. The committee report before members, and to which this presentation relates, is carefully structured. It brings together the views contributed by the public, the views of consultees, the planning history of the site, and the national and local policy context. And it has set out the assessment of the environmental and planning issues. Then, having weighed up the benefits against the disadvantages of the development proposed, the report concludes with a recommendation for the view of the Comhairle for submission to Scottish ministers. This presentation will set out a summary of the details of the development proposed and the planning history of the site, before looking at some key visualisations of the scheme. We will then look at the principle of the development and the issues considered within the assessment, as set out in the committee report, before setting out the key benefits of the scheme, the potential significant harmful impacts, and the mitigation measures proposed. The presentation, like the report, will conclude with the recommendation of the view of the Comhairle to be submitted to Scottish ministers. The application seeks consent for the erection of up to 25 turbines on land approximately 20 kilometres southwest of Stornoway. The site is some 1,647 hectares in size, as Morag said, about 4,000 acres. Although the wind farm infrastructure would only occupy a small part of the overall development site, as each wind turbine needs to be separated from its neighbouring turbine to maximise performance. This slide shows the extent of the site in relation to Stornoway, to the top of the slide, and the A859 Stornoway to Tarbert Road through this part of Lewis. This slide shows the application site in a little more detail, including the position of the proposed turbines within the main part of the application site and the access to the site from the main A859 road along the unclassified but adopted Ishkin Road. The extent of the application site was enlarged as part of the application process to provide additional land within the site for peat restoration, which is outlined in green, wet heath restoration, which is shown in purple, and a second substation compound, which is shown in red. This slide shows the extent of development proposed within the application site in a little more detail. The proposed turbine locations are marked in blue for the 22 turbines of 200 metres in height and green for the 3 turbines of 180 metres. The proposed permanent Met masts are located within the turbine layout and marked with a black triangle. The 2 proposed substations are close to the Ishkin Road and marked in red. The existing public road, the Ishkin Road, within the site boundary is shown in black and is proposed to be upgraded. The access tracks to serve the turbines are shown in brown, with the floating access tracks indicated in green. The temporary construction compounds are in orange, with the proposed borrow pits shown with a purple crosshatch. This slide shows the layout of the previously consented Comhairle wind farm and its east extension outlined in green and the south extension outlined in brown. These three Section 36 consents are jointly referred to as the consented scheme in the committee report and in this presentation. The wind farm previously consented is in broadly the same area as the development now proposed. The main difference is that the consented scheme extends further to the south and west and proposes up to 45 turbines rather than up to 25. This slide provides a side-by-side comparison of the two layouts, with the consented scheme to the left and the proposed development layout of the current application to the right. The comparison demonstrates clearly that the turbines in the current proposal would be more clustered than those of the consented scheme. It would also see the emission of the turbines high up on the ridge to the west and those in the extreme southwest of the consented development, and this will become evident when we look at the visualisations. The public road, which is shown in black, would pass through the proposed wind farm, with 4 of the proposed turbines located to the east of the township road and the remainder to the west. The existing adopted Ishkin Road is proposed to be upgraded and widened to 5 metres to serve the development. This slide shows an extract of the Ishkin Road improvement, where a replacement bridge is proposed on a new alignment, which is indicated in purple, just to the east of the existing Ishkin Road Seaforth River crossing. This slide shows the layout of the proposed development. It would consist of up to 25 three-bladed horizontal wind turbines and would have a total installed capacity of approximately 165 megawatts and produce an average of approximately 578,160 megawatt hours of electricity annually, which is based on a site-derived capacity factor of 40%. And this would equate to the power consumed by approximately 164,764 average UK households. The proposed development is estimated to become carbon neutral in approximately 1.3 years. The previously consented scheme was for 45 shorter turbines. 33 turbines would be of 145 metres to the tip, 11 turbines of 150 metres to the tip, and 1 turbine of 130 metres to the tip. The current application proposes 2 heights of turbine. 22 turbines would be 200 metres to tip height, and 3 turbines would be 180 metres to tip height. The turbine indicated on the slide is a typical example, with the model as yet to be finalised. If members are minded to support the proposal, the overall height and colour of the turbines is recommended to be controlled by condition. As well as the turbines themselves, a significant amount of associated development and infrastructure would be required to support the proposal. 2 substation compounds are proposed, each of which would have a control building. This slide shows an indicative elevation, the final details of which are again proposed to be controlled by condition. The proposed development also includes 2 permanent met masts, which would be up to 122.5 metres in height, as indicated on this slide. I'll now hand you back to Morag, who'll take you through some of the key visualisations of the scheme.
Thanks, Anne. The slide has a coloured overlay indicating where wind turbines are likely to be visible from. In theory, it's a bare earth model, so it doesn't include visibility if there are buildings or trees that would obscure views. So the area marked in blue are where both the consented scheme and the newly proposed scheme would be visible. So from viewpoints on land, there would not be any sort of significant major additional visibility. The green are areas where the proposed development would now be visible, and the yellow is where the formerly consented scheme would be visible. Sorry, I should have said one of the main impacts of any large-scale wind farm is the landscape and visual impacts will almost invariably arise. And in this case, these are assessed as significant after mitigation is applied and is a key matter assessed through the EIA. The EIA has carried out an assessment of each of the viewpoints that are shown marked with a circle dot and reference number on that slide. Because the scheme also includes a formally consented scheme, there is also a project comparison report that sets out the visualisations of what the scheme would be like under the formally consented scheme and what it would be like under the proposed scheme. So the first of these visualisations is taken on the road between Graver and Lembreway. So it's east of the application site. You're looking west through the wind farm at this point. The ridge on the right is Ferrocheval, the long ridge, the hill in the middle, Ben Vienach, and Moyeval is the hill in the background further to the left. The top slide is the proposed development, which is subject to this application. The bottom is shows the layout and distribution and height of the formerly consented 45 turbine development. And the key difference here is the omission of the 5 turbines that were high up on the ridge of Ferrocheval in the former consented scheme. You can see them visible in the bottom slide. There are no longer turbines at that particular elevation. This next slide is a visualisation that's taken from the top of Benvor, the summit of which lies 4 kilometres to the southwest of the nearest turbines in the proposed wind farm. Benvor is 572 metres, or just shy of 1900 feet. And here you're looking northeast through the wind farm over the moors of South Loch towards the Minch. And you see along the inner reaches of the Loch Shallag sea loch in that visualisation. And here the key design improvement is the omission of the 3 turbines in the former south extension that you see in the foreground of the bottom visualisation. So that's these 3 large turbines you see in the bottom. You'll see that they're no longer sited there in the proposed scheme, and that is an improvement in terms of design. This next visualisation is taken on the Leopost Village Road. It's just as you come out the road of the North Lochs Community Association track, and if you turn right to the west, about 100 metres along, and stop and look south towards the hills. The viewpoint here was used to illustrate both daytime impacts and also nighttime impacts, because there will be aviation lighting on a number of these turbines. To the naked eye, the wind farm here will be in the distance, but it will change views from the village where the houses are predominantly facing south. And at night time, the aviation lights will be visible. However, our conclusion is that the viewpoint, there won't be much of a difference in the effects from the former consented development when compared with the now proposed. This next visualisation is taken from the top of the Cleasham. Cleasham is the highest summit in the Outer Hebrides at 2,621 feet. It's a popular hill walking route, and at its summit there is views of a number of other hill ridges visible from it. This slide again, the image is taken looking northeast across various other hills in South Lewis, and the branches of Loch Seaforth are the loch that you can see in the slide. The highest hill in the view to the right is Benvor, from which I've shown a previous visualisation. Again, apart from this view, you'll see the turbines of the wind farm running along the ridge and in the valley beyond, but the difference between the consented and the proposed scheme is marginal. The next 2 slides have been covered by what we call a wireframe, because at the level of detail it's difficult to see in the visualisation the points covered. But this is one that is taken from viewpoint 16, which is the Callanish Standing Stones. The Callanish Standing Stones are a scheduled monument lying to the northwest of the proposed wind farm, and it is a site of international importance and therefore imperative that its setting is protected from any inappropriate development. At the major lunar standstill, the moon is said to align with the southern hills, and the ridge along there is known as the Cailleach na Mondeach and framed from the Caillinear stones. The proposed development, on account of the increased height of the turbines, mean that more of the turbine tips will be visible, but while there will be more of them visible, they would appear slightly further to the left of those in the consented scheme, and therefore in a slightly less intrusive position on the Cailleach na Mondeach ridge in views from the Caillinear stones. So they're indicated in the top slide by the red marcus at the top there, and you can see a lesser number but slightly further to the right on the bottom slide. And then the final viewpoint needs no explanation. The Luce War Memorial, erected in 1924, stands on a hilltop outside Stornoway, holding a commanding position in the landscape. And again, it's a very important structure which is listed. Looking south, the turbine tips will be visible again in the distance, with the 3 Arnish Moor turbines and the Creed turbine visible in the foreground. Again, the wireframe demonstrates that the proposed scheme at the top of the slide will result in a slightly more compact layout of the wind farm than was the case with the consented scheme, which is a positive benefit. I'll now hand you back to Anne to take you through the final stages of the presentation.
Thank you, Morag. We'll now look at the policy context for the proposal and the principle of development. As a defined national development in NPF 4, the principle of the proposed development does not need to be agreed. In terms of the spatial strategy, the location of the proposed wind farm is considered to accord with policy, subject to detailed assessment of compliance with the provisions of the supplementary guidance. In addition, the location and extent of the site is broadly comparable to that of the consented scheme. Thank you. If we could move on to the next slide as well, please. Thank you. The application includes a comprehensive EIA report as revised by the Supplementary Environmental Information, which considers potential impacts of the proposed development in relation to particular topics as indicated on the slide. The EIA report concludes with an assessment of the significance of effects for each of these issues. The committee report for each issue considers the policy context, summarises the findings of the EIA report, and provides an assessment of the issue. This assessment draws on the responses by specialist consultees and public comments, both for and against, before reaching an overall conclusion. Generally, the conclusion of the assessment in the committee report reflects the comments of consultees. Where, on occasion, we've come to a different view, the justification for this is set out within the report. Given the support for such development within national and local planning policies, one of the key benefits of the proposal would be the provision of renewable energy. A total installed capacity of approximately 165 megawatts would make a meaningful contribution to meeting Scottish and UK government targets. The overall anticipated carbon payback time is 1.3 years. The potential emissions savings would be over 7 million tonnes of carbon dioxide over the lifetime of the development. Therefore, these represent clear and demonstrable benefits of the proposal that should be given significant weight in its favour. The proposal would also have a positive effect on the local economy and employment, and subject to the satisfactory provision of accommodation, would not be harmful to tourism. It would have some benefits to recreational access and has the potential to result in community wealth building, subject to securing the identified mitigation by planning conditions. Whilst these benefits are likely to be relatively modest, given the island context, it is considered that they should also be given significant weight. In addition, peat extraction volumes and the extent of habitat loss is an improvement over the consented scheme, as is the extent of the proposed habitat restoration, its future management and the potential for biodiversity enhancement. These are matters that also weigh in its favour. The main adverse effects of the proposal would be in relation to landscape and visual impacts. We could move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. There would be significant adverse effects on landscape character and the widespread significant adverse effects on views. These impacts would affect only parts of the surrounding sensitive landscape and specific views, and would not significantly affect the reasons for the designation of the South Harris, South Lewis, Harris and North Uist National Scenic Area, its special qualities or its overall integrity. However, given the scale of the likely effects, it's considered that the proposal would not maintain the overall integrity of landscape character or relate positively to the specific landscape and visual characteristics of the local area. Having regard to the extent and nature of these effects, it's considered that this harm should be afforded significant weight. I'll hand you back to Morag for the planning balance and the conclusion of the presentation.
Thanks. In the main, subject to the implementation of the identified mitigation measures, the residual impacts of the proposed development are generally considered to weigh neither for nor against the proposal. Significant weight has been given to the harm to landscape character and visual impacts in accordance with local and national planning policy. Having regard to national policy, it's concluded that the harm would be clearly outweighed by the greater significant weight given to the national benefits resulting from the delivery of renewable energy infrastructure, coupled with a significant weight given to the modest socio-economic benefits and biodiversity enhancements. In addition, while the proposal would cause material harm to the landscape and visual amenity, it's considered that overall the proposed development would be less harmful than the extant consented scheme. That also lends support for the proposal in the planning balance. Consequently, in this case, it's concluded that the identified conflict with Outer Hebrides Local Development Plan Policy NBH1 would be outweighed by NPF 4 Policy 11E, and the particular benefits of the development proposed as set out above would be sufficient to justify support for the proposal overall. The recommendation is set out at paragraph 3.1 of the committee report, and it's just set out here for ease of reference. I'll just allow members to read through that slide, please. And the views at section 15 are on the following slide. I don't know if they can move that on, it's not moving. So there are a number of points to the proposed Comhairle view which are reproduced in this slide. By way of explanation, if the scheme is granted consent under section 36 of the Electricity Act by Scottish ministers, then a deemed planning permission would also be granted. Appendix 1 of your reports includes the detailed wording of planning conditions that are suggested for incorporation within any decision, and it also refers to the need for a Section 75 planning agreement and legal obligation, and sets out other various matters that would need to be covered. Further, while the proposed development follows a broadly similar location to the previously consented scheme, there are a couple of areas of the site which do not overlap, and in the absence of agreement to the contrary, it may be theoretically possible to develop elements of the formerly consented scheme, even if the current scheme is granted consent. As that would not be appropriate and has not been covered in the assessment, it would be the case that we would seek to obtain an agreement from the applicant through the Section 75 to not develop those further areas of the extant consented scheme. That concludes the presentation, and we're happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Bora Pine, questions to me, ik baal maar een. Daar is zo, dan moet je een hasmeneer onderzien. Only Ray McConaughey.
Thank you, Chair. It's a huge report, obviously, and you can spend days going through it, and of course we did. The planning board passed it, so I assume all the various reasons have been covered. I'm not on the planning board, but I'm not obviously going to move against this, but there are 2 or 3 questions that I have, which the first one is to do with the community benefit. I'm not quite sure, the report doesn't say what the community is. It's South Lochs, obviously. Maybe somebody can tell me, which villages or what that covers. Secondly, there's I would wonder about this decommissioning. We're talking about 30 years ahead, and I wonder they have to, if something goes wrong, if the company goes or whatever happens over the next 30 years, we're talking about they have to come within 12 months of the final, 30 months. It may go on, I don't know. But is this really giving, are we not, is there a possibility that we could be left with structures and all the rest of, if a company just walks away? Are there more guarantees from our point of view as islanders that we're not going to be stuck with something at the end of the day and a company has just walked away from the situation? So that's the two immediate questions that I find I would like a wee bit of information on.
Luister, mensen, kon ik hier met morgen een keer eens vragen een question, een goed mensen, kon ik morgen.
Happily. Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. I would reiterate that the community benefit of a wind farm proposal is not a material planning consideration, and it's not a matter that planning can take into account in determining the application. That's a matter that requires to be negotiated completely separately out with planning. The second point to do with the future decommissioning of the wind farm, there is a provision within Appendix 1 that there is a recommendation that there is a decommissioning plan and a restoration bond, which requires to be secured at the outset of the development in order that that bond is in place should the developer, should the wind farm cease to operate or the developer not be in place. So that bond is held independently for the duration of the development and could be called upon to restore the site should the developer fail to do so.
Sorry, I must have missed the bit about the bond, which is the important thing. I'm very glad to hear that. but with regard to the other one, I know it's not a planning matter. You made that quite clear to us during planning training. But at the same time, it just, to my mind, it seems a very small amount. You mentioned, somebody mentioned, that, you know, it's a major contribution to Scottish and UK government benefits. And this is versus the loss of amenity. So, although strictly speaking, it's not a matter of planning, I think that we as a community should be able to influence that.
Okay, tapalaisha, manche kon ik tingel gyodi keshchyd. Only garden mother.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you very much for the report. It's quite a massive undertaking, and you probably, I don't know if this is the beginning of the end of it or the end of the beginning. It's quite a large undertaking, and thank you very much for all the work you've done. I've just got a general question and a specific question. I wanted to ask about, can you remind me of the Council's position on the amount of cash which developers pay per megawatt for community benefit? And is there any indicative figures for the terms of the Section 75 for community benefit in Section 75 agreement of this?
Okay. Again, because community benefit is not a material planning consideration, it can't be covered in the terms of Section 75 agreement, because the Section 75 agreement is a planning obligation. So it's not legally competent to cover community benefit under that. It would be a separate arrangement. And in terms again of the amount of per megawatt, again, that's not a planning matter and can't be taken into account in the council determining the planning application. That's really for a different discussion with possibly colleagues in economic development.
So we can take this up at the Sustainable Development Committee. It's just that it looks like the Chief Executive's been delegated to agree a Section 75. So if he agrees the Section 75, how will we have any chance to assess it or look at it or consider it?
In terms of community benefit, I think it might be worth putting a report to sustainable development in terms of the schemes that are out there and what discussions we know they're having with communities, just so that members can have a clear overview of what's and just so we keep it completely separate from this discussion as well. So we can commit to do that.
Okay,
can I ask about the community benefit for this scheme? Are we able to have some sort of influence on the members? I'm just concerned that we're not getting enough community benefit from this scheme.
Pardon? That's not something the Comhairle are engaged with this developer. There's discussions with the community and there's agreements in place. But as I say, this is about the planning application, but we can provide an overview of all the discussions that are taking place at sustainable development.
I'm just still a bit concerned that this scheme is huge, and I'm just minded of Highland Council's approach to community benefit. Their expectations from renewables, and they've set up a social value charter for renewable investment, which informs developers planning on investing in the region of the council's expectations. Now, I think the bottom line is usually about £5,000 per megawatt, but Highland Council are now at £11,500 per megawatt. Now, what I see in there is something about a footpath and apprenticeships. I just want to be clear that we're maximising the amount of community benefit for our community. And such a huge, there's millions involved here. I think the community can't be too altruistic and needs to look after itself.
Am so fi me hin seach seo mai se mod ich chaim smuige gel gronch se mi ge chusper ha kona me agus ke lochi. Si darút gema adriali an morson sto me an beart ni kene kut oi noch gerich je stoch committee chefsfach es jarat.
Just to close it, convener, I mean, are we able to see the Section 75 agreement before it's actually authorised? What's negotiated and it's brought back to the Comhairle? I think that would be fair enough so members can have a look at what's been proposed by the Chief Executive. I mean, I've got an amendment worded if you want to listen to it. Okay. I think in terms of Section C.
Fónig me ga morach ni gerige sin seach sin fónig me morach ni gerige sin seach agus record horgan cheisteit.
If I can take you to Appendix 1, first of all, of the committee report. I don't know how easy that is to pull up on the thing. So there are three, within the view that is going to Scottish ministers, there are three distinct parts to that. So there are the planning conditions, which are there to control mitigation and make the scheme acceptable. There is a requirement for a Section 75 planning obligations agreement. Now, to be a condition or to be in a Section 75, they require to meet the legal tests for a condition. So they must be, related to planning matters and related to the scheme. So those two, the schedule of conditions and the Section 75 agreement can only relate to things that meet the legal tests to be tied in via planning. Separate to that, the developer has offered up a number of other community wealth type benefits, which will be of benefit to the scheme. So the local contractors policy, which is a benefit to the tourism, which counters the harm to tourism by accommodation. The contractors policy, local contractors policy, the footpath scheme, and I don't know if you want to come in and remind me of
Eagle Conservation Programme.
So these are things that are classed as benefits, but they don't meet the tests of the planning agreement, but they're nevertheless put forward as, either enhancements or mitigations as part of the scheme, and they require to be secured through an agreement under the Local Government Act. The community benefits are not benefits for the Comhairle to secure. It's a conversation. It's a conversation between the developer and the community, and you have to assess every planning application as if there were no community benefits. That's the baseline. Community benefit is a voluntary agreement between the developers and communities based on best practice guidance that the government have issued. It's for another part of the council to deal with that, and all I would just say is that the council must determine this planning application on the merits of its harms and benefits from a planning perspective. And that's what the presentation has covered. So if that helps.
Thank you very much for that explanation. Just want to make sure that the Comhairle will have a chance to look at the community benefit for this issue at another committee. That be correct?
Said we can put a report forward regarding community benefit and what's been negotiated and achieved across the islands, but as Morag's stressed that's separate to what gets decided just now on this particular application in front of you.
I understand that. It's just the community benefit for this project. I know you're saying a general overview, but will we have a chance to influence the community benefit and make sure that we're maximising?
Wel, am sôn ffos o moddwch y gra, gymi cormac yn yrist. Brin, edrych stores corsnog, siach, by brin mae un rast o fain sy'n moddich. Am sôn nodi gyfedig eis gyhyn go na chomedi, gan a chomedi siesfoch. Ys tori trwysyn? Glyf am ha, fel cesyn sy'n mi elig bael yn hwn i chi nori don noch?
Thanks, Convener. I think possibly what Gordon might have been trying to ask was, would the Comhairle at any stage in the planning process be able to put a condition of planning community benefit was included? I don't know, Gordon, maybe that's possibly what you were alluding to. Do we have any regime within the legal side of things where planning conditions can be applied to a planning application, possibly with regard to community benefit? I'm not too sure about that. If that's possibly the question you may be trying to ask.
Papalaische nori more ac ni geregish.
Yep. It's the government made it clear that community benefits, i.e. cash benefits, are not a material planning consideration and therefore it can't be covered as a planning condition because it doesn't meet the legal tests for being a planning condition. And it is therefore the case that we as planning officers have no involvement whatsoever, or we can't consider, ask, or have anything to do with community benefits. It's for others. So it can't be a condition.
Okay. Papalaische vorak vel question ek dingen se mi. Een koolje in neus McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. Not so much a question, Convener, but just to make the point that the Council has already set up a major development oversight board to look into all of these kind of issues and report to sustainable development on a regular basis. So I don't think there's any difficulty with councillors having an opportunity to comment.
Papalaische van Shith McCormick. El kesh you can eval letter. Ding a loine ek giori kesh to me oinok. Man hel vel beide guntige in de Malian ek 3 point gehen. Je guntige. Mas jikshin kon na kuspar shakam so kom horgin je. Jech minute in de gosh gol. Agus kujoch. Femi kun an keine bail. Na hasing a jelige de kuchen planning. Femi de fudok stay is in homer ads hasing kunrak show. Ma hu fagal homer chinarash gaan root paars to go on the vote. Ma she ruta agus ginega go vote. But truth weil washing a jespe de kuspar shia but the maxishach agus motion ma big vote de viaun haburga even yes voted. So famishing could on the kind of bail. So goishing run a nachus para shach when I sing a brain root kit jolavachi goishing fosh a shon jech minachin agus toshi honyu rashi cook minachin piget go kia. Kars ma ha fitishing toshog rish shay fosh gadich agus fishing an ishe dol go Kuspar shach a chlar oproch sin path storig loo ag roo vatri straj iniclich an storm ag elen loish agus an naj klish an ardropigar am niortus jalava agus channéidir in díirde sa dhearag fó údras agus a réir skimme údaris haid sin chun chóra sean cogúnag. Bhil bord íirdas an jalabi ag coniú néisina Jamars an Teslagar an nólog Davínas céir díchad gynnéag untachar in y molin an y naisg yn nardofgar. Brin i morach ni garagais rys yn naisg sio agos ffragr i cestion sy'n mi eg bail. Y borach.
I believe. As convener said, it's a planning application which is classed as a major development. It's for the establishment of a battery energy storage facility on land beside the power station at Battery Point in Newton Street in Stornoway. Marina. The planning commission sought for 6 banks of battery units. Each unit is 1.3 metre square in terms of footprint and about 2.3 metres tall, so fairly similar in size to a comms cabinet, like an IT comms cabinet. The siting of these will be in 6 rows, 6 banks of 24 units each, so 2 by 12. There will also be an associated inverter and transformer at the head of each of these 6 banks. The site will also be incorporate a welfare unit and storage container for parts. 2 site accesses would be created. The site itself would be excavated and formed of hard standing. There would be a car parking area, and there would be a 3 metre high palisade security fence with a 4 metre high acoustic barrier inside around the actual battery storage banks, and then a 3 metre high mesh wire fence on the exterior. So in terms of location, this slide just shows where the location of the site is in relation to the town of Stornoway and Goat Island in Stornoway Harbour. You can see the piers, pier number 1, 2 and 3 in Stornoway Harbour there, the mouth of the Creed, Goat Island with the new marina, and the site is just off Newton Street, identified in red in the bottom right-hand quadrant of the slide there. You can see the council buildings on the running track in the section above, just to give orientation. In terms of the development strategy in the council's Outer Hebrides Local Development Plan, the site itself sits within the boundaries of the main settlement of Stornoway. The site is brownfield land, which is encouraged as the type of land for where this nature development should take place. At the present time, the site is just covered in rough grasses, and there are isolated pockets of discarded marine equipment in different parts of the site. The site itself is actually relatively small. It's less than half a hectare. Part of it is reclaimed ground. It sits to the south of the Seaview Terrace, and it's very close to the start of the causeway over to Goat Island. The surroundings are built development, Coast Guard stations to the south, and the hard standing relating to the power station, and the power station itself is to the north and east. The site's not within any designations. This slide just shows the extent of this site in a little bit more detail. So on the top left of the slide there is like Newton Street as you're leaving the town, heading out towards Battery Point. The Newton Industrial Estate is in the top of the slide. To the right, you'll see the houses in Newton Street and Newton Terrace, or rather Seaview Terrace, Seaview Road, Seaview Terrace, and then the Battery Point Power Station and the substation behind it, which you can see on to the right of the screen, and then the causeway that takes you over to Goat Island. And then just to the south of the south outlined in red, there is the control centre for Stornoway Coast Guard. Just maybe let members have a better look at this slide, just for the detail. So at the north end of the site, there will be a new access created. So an access will come in just as you move on to the shoreline to move across to the causeway. There will be a new access point created there, and the main gate would be to the north of the site, which would be covered, which would be a hard standing. There would be a main gate there. There will be a 33 kilovolt substation and an auxiliary transformer and a turning area for vehicles in that area of hard standing, all of which would be outside the main fenced compound. You can see the 6 rows of 24 battery banks with the inverter and transformer at the west side. They're outlined in orange there would be like an acoustic barrier, which would be 4 meters high. So it would sit about 1 meter in height above the height of the actual battery banks. And that would be on the north and the east boundary. Then there would be in green a 3 meter palisade fence to enclose that, to make that area secure. There would then be some car parking and a secondary gate to the south, where the dark blue is shown there. So this next slide just shows where some landscaping is proposed to soften the appearance of the development. So just beside, to the far side of the Coast Guard station, there would be some bushes and some greenery, same between the newly proposed access road and the power station's work site, I suppose, where they keep like spare cable drums and transformers. And also some greenery along the frontage. The developer has submitted a couple of visualizations just to give you a sense of what the development would look like. So Newton Street itself has like a seawall along the shore side. And if you look at the small inset picture on the right there, you can see that the camera is actually, tripod is actually sited on the top of the slipway just outside the seawall. That gives a clear view along to the power station. So the kind of grey view shed just lets you see the extent of the visualization that is on the next screen. So this is a picture taken from that position of the current view. So that's without any development. So you've got the power station and the 3 chimneys on the left, Newton Street behind the seawall on the left, and the large building just before you go onto the causeway is the Coast Guard Control Centre. And it's useful in this view just to look at the height of the first floor of the Coast Guard building, where you see the windows in the kind of slightly light green render, and that gives you like the kind of first floor height. And then if you move to the next slide, which is a visualization of the proposed development, you can see the battery storage. The kind of light grey would be the acoustic barrier, and the actual battery modules would sit below that. So if I just flick back between that screen, it maybe just gives a better view of what you would see. So the actual visual impact from that view is relatively inconsequential. The next slide is a viewpoint that's taken on the Goat Island Causeway, looking back towards Seaview Terrace, the power station, and the site. And again, the inset shows you where the camera is set up on a tripod on the causeway. So from this view, you can see again the Coast Guard station in the right. In this instance, the power station sits to your right with the chimneys. The site is to the left of the causeway, if you like, between where you see the Coast Guard station and the Seaview Terrace houses further in the background. So again, if I take you to the visualization, you can see the height of the acoustic barrier and the actual battery storage units themselves. And then you can see like the sort of lightly dark green areas where there would be some greenery introduced along the front edge of the site, out with the perimeter mesh fence. So then there's just a series of photos, and these are photos that we've just taken on ourselves on site visits, so they're not visualizations, they're just for context. So this is taken just outside 27 Newton Street, which is just at the bottom of Island Road as you come out of the Newton Industrial Estate, if you were turning left towards the power station. And then slightly further along the road at 34 Newton Street, again, just the view of where the site is between the power station and the Coast Guard station there. And these are just two zoomed in views, getting slightly closer again. So there is like a kind of like amenity area with some grasses on the left there just before you turn over to Goat Island and the fence, and then zoomed in, just panning round towards the Coast Guard station. And it's basically the piece of land that's just beyond that ranch fence. This is just a photo that just gives you context of the flats at Seaview Terrace. And that's taken just, you can see that this was taken just to illustrate that these houses do sit on higher ground. That photo was taken adjacent to the secondary access into the power station, where the SSEN have their kind of spares compound. That's just panning round on the same view and just looking into the SSEN compound, and you can just see the roof of the Coast Guard station appearing in the background. And that's just a further picture taken from that same position. So here you can just see that, you know, you're at about 2 meters higher than the actual application site. Now these next two slides, these are taken right down at the gate if you go along Newton Terrace and you actually go down in behind the power station. So that's just some of the vegetation, some of the views you'll see from the back of Seaview Terrace onto the power station. And then that is from the same position looking down towards the site. And what's useful here is there are two transformers there, these two dark brown transformers. And you can see like there's a blue container in the background sitting at a much lower level. And you'll see that in a later image, but that's kind of sitting at, it's like just a kind of marker in terms of the levels of the site. So the site itself, this is just some photographs that I've taken from just outside the Coast Guard station, and just shows that some of the kind of marine equipment and debris that's kind of been, you know, left on the kind of more southerly part of the site. And then this is as you move along, walking along the causeway towards where the fence is, just looking over the site. You can see that blue container that I referenced. Again, it's sitting slightly higher, and behind it the two brown transformers that are inside the SSE compound. That's just another photo that's taken slightly further along on the fence, again with the houses, Seaview Terrace in the background and the rough grasses that overlay the site. So there are a number of representation comments received in relation to this application, including concerns raised by Stornoway Community Council. These concerns were to do with the location, being unsuitable for the nature of the development, feeling that there was a lack of justification for the carbon savings that would be achieved through this development, considerable concern by all parties submitted representation to do with fire safety and public and human health, concerns over impact on green space, biodiversity, general environmental impact, visual impact, economic impact, contribution to community wealth building, and also suggestions put forward for alternative sites where this development could take place, and also better uses for this particular site. And then there were also some concerns over procedural issues to do with the pre-application consultation. So the key planning issues here are, you know, first of all, the character of the area. Whether it's residential, industrial, in fact, it's of a mixed character. Also, in terms of development strategy, its location and the character of the site. The site itself, it's within Stornoway Core, where the development plan expects to see development. It's also brownfield land, partially reclaimed land, and again, it's land where the development plan would expect to see being put to a new use. It's not allocated for any particular use in the development plan, and it's also on the edge of the Stornoway Core in terms of settlement strategy. There were visual impacts raised, and we've covered those in the previous slides to do with setting out the context and what the development might look like in terms of scale if consented and laterally constructed. In terms of noise, there's a proposal that there would be an acoustic barrier around the north and eastern parts of the battery storage units, and with that in place, the noise levels would be are judged by following advice from environmental health to be acceptable. There are concerns regarding residential amenity, and in particular the nature of this development being a battery storage proposal next to an area where there is both housing and some holiday accommodation. Concerns have been raised to do with fire risk and health and safety. On the other hand, there is significant national policy support for battery energy storage, as in order to be able to capitalise on renewable energy that's generated, there is a need for the ability to store energy for it to be then drawn into the grid at the time that there's peak demand. Technology itself, it's relatively new, but it's a rapidly expanding type of development across Scotland. There are many, many applications of this type. There remains a lack of clarity over the overall regulatory framework, although individual components of the development would be regulated in the sense that the batteries themselves or the battery packs have to be manufactured to meet certain standards. There's also at the moment a lack of specific planning guidance in relation to battery energy storage schemes, and therefore reliance on assessing the acceptability of a development falls back to the development plan and some guidance that has been produced nationally, which is guidance, not policy. So the main piece of that guidance is the National Fire Chief Council guidance, which has been issued for fire and rescue services. That's been made available as an appendix to the report. And the other thing is the developer themselves have actually submitted a health and safety statement. So it's the case that planning applications required to be determined in accordance with the provisions of the Comhairle Development Plan, unless material considerations indicate otherwise. While this is a major development in terms of its rating at 25 megawatts, the decision maker in this case is the Comhairle. It's proposed that, subject to management by conditions which are set out in Appendix 1, that the planning assessment has concluded that overall the policies of the development plan taken as a whole would largely be met and the development would be acceptable in relation to the significant effects on the environment. It's therefore concluded that the benefits of the proposed development are most likely to outweigh the likely harms when the significant weight offered by national and local policy to green energy and decarbonisation of the grid is taken into account. It's acknowledged that best technology will have some health and safety risks, but with appropriate design and mitigation measures proposed, first of all by the application and sought to be covered by condition, the likelihood of occurrence of these is considered to be low. The recommendation is that the development be approved subject to the conditions that are set out in Appendix 1, these to mitigate the effects and secure finalised details of the layout and management plans, including health and safety and drainage management plan. Further, it's recommended that the consent be granted for 5 years duration, given that the development type is still evolving and it may take, if consented, it may take longer than 3 years to be ready for implementation. Happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Papalaise bhórach Sean náis go siúd agus gáil tré an na dóid go maith mínateach agus mór an tain go iad hafsa gan ein seo nádané ag comedí planning agus comedí jolabhachaí. Bhfuil dinge sa mí Sean question a chuth mórach ní geregas an ghólaigh ré a chuinnig.
Convener, yeah, I'll be interested to see if anybody else comes forward with any questions. But again, I don't know what, I wasn't on the planning board, but I'm not happy about this, and I may be a minority of one here, but it was mentioned by some of the objectors, or whatever you want to call them, that Arnish would have been a more suitable site. And of course it would. Whatever the technicalities are, that's where everything's going to be. That's where the centre of energy is going to be, not in the middle of a council housing. And I don't mean council housing, but housing, which is in this part of the area, which is quite well built up and within a very short distance of this particular site. In addition, you have the Coast Guard station and so on, the rest of the buildings at the other end of the causeway. I'm extremely worried about this personally. I may be unjustified in having fears, and that everything has been covered by the report, which is a long and detailed report, and thank you for that. But I'm surprised, for instance, that the fire brigade there's been no response. There is a long appendix, and I appreciate that, which is a long appendix, which is a general report from November 2020, that's me going back, 2022, on batteries. You know, and it doesn't actually deal with a specific area or where it's crammed into, or whether it's out in the middle of a green field or a croft somewhere. So it doesn't take in any local knowledge. That's a point I'm making. And as I say, I don't know who's actually responsible for not putting forward a report from the fire brigade, whether it's a local fire or North of Scotland Fire Brigade or wherever. So, as I say, you know, it's easy just to chuck out a report that does the whole of the country from 2 years ago. There is a health and safety risk, whatever anybody says, and again, I have my doubts about that. So I'm sure some of these things were discussed yesterday, and there's a lot of it contained in there. But as far as I'm concerned, where it is not right, and there's a health and safety risk. And I'm sorry the fire brigade haven't sort of come in on this.
Tapalaise bhainste bhí cónich agus am toirt cláintin gan an sa pici do leine a siú smúne chu nuas nach an ánas de nágu lín díag a siú smúne chu. Iorimi mórach ní geregus fragart hort ganna poinken hug sinarde. Mórach.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. First of all, just on alternative locations, and that has been proposed by various parties who submitted representations. It is the case that when we are dealing with a planning application, we can only assess the actual application on the site that's before us. We can't have regard in this kind of situation to other sites where it's considered that a development could be better sited because there is no site allocated in the development plan, and this particular site that has been selected is not an allocated site in the development plan, and therefore it just falls to be tested against the other relevant policies. I'll maybe take you to the appendix to which Councillor Mackenzie refers, and it's identified as Appendix 7 in the report, and it is the appendix which I referenced in the presentation. It is a piece of guidance that was produced by the National Fire Chief Councils to provide guidance to fire and rescue services, and it was produced in November of 2022. Now, earlier this year, the National Fire Chiefs Council did consult each of the fire services in the UK on a revised version of this guidance. So there is a revision of this in process, and we've had a look at the revision. The revision does not propose anything that is, the revision as consulted upon doesn't propose anything radically different from what is in this document. This document has a section. First of all, this document was produced in the absence of other guidance. This guidance was produced by the National Fire Chiefs Council for the benefit of fire services from the point of view of firefighters dealing with plans that were coming forward and indeed managing ones that are already built. But it is purely guidance. And at the moment, the fire service is not a statutory consultee. So there is without doubt a gap in the overall regulatory framework, although the individual bits are regulated. So this being the only piece of formal guidance that is available to us, it's been adopted by the developer in drafting up their health and safety statement. It is being reviewed, and there are discussions ongoing at UK level and at with Scottish Government over the kind of planning guidance, and indeed I would imagine eventual formal guidance to fire and rescue services. And I would expect fire and rescue services would ultimately become statutory consultees, but at the moment, because they're not a statutory consultee, they have no obligation to respond. I suspect that any fire service who doesn't have their own very clear policy would be reticent to commit to writing their planning consultation when they don't have that formal backing behind them. So there is a bit of a vacuum in terms of the overall regulatory process, but there are many of these applications in process across the country, and there are many of these already built, and there is strong policy support for battery energy storage in order to store powerful renewable energy. I don't know, does that help clarify?
Vice Koenig.
Thank you. Well, it explains things very clearly. It's a pity we didn't have the subsequent report from the fire service. But I'm not happy for all the reasons I've mentioned, the closeness to houses and Coast Guard station and all the rest of it. So, yeah, I would like to see a report from the local fire service, and whether that be the Stornoway based or Highland based, preferably as local as possible, and a report come back to us. And I'll probably move that at the end of the meeting on my own.
Appalachian, Vice Koenig, waar ek luskuri record visa til gesh for bringe aish kwene in het smali, shall smali in het al. El solis kujineth. Okay, Borak
Okay,
Nikaragish.
all I can really add is that we did consult the Scottish Fire and Rescue
Okay.
Service and they elected not to respond. We understand the developer has been in communication with the local fire service, but we consult with the national body. That's what we're required to do. The only thing I would add is that in terms of this guidance, and I would stress it is only guidance, at page 7 of 10, there is a section that says distance from base units to occupied buildings and site boundaries. And it's clear that it says individual site designs will mean that distances between base units and occupied building site boundaries will vary. Proposed distances should take into account risk and mitigation factors. However, an initial minimum distance of 25 metres is proposed prior to any mitigation, such as blast walls. It is the case that in our situation, the distance from the batteries to Seaview Terrace is 65 metres. So we are well inside, well beyond the 25 metres that is in this guidance. And we're not experts in health and safety, and normally it wouldn't be something that would be a planning matter. And therefore all we can go on is, this guidance that is available.
Okay. Margaridu Borak agus tapalaisha shona fragration. Cornisol van de meer. Thorshock een goorlijke kalm doonloch en doorsjen een goorlijke Francis Vodoch. Hij zal met dingen leiden. Ach, jullie zijn een goorlijke doonloch en de zeggen Thorshock. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the officers for producing a comprehensive report. There was one item, perhaps, I don't know if it's an observation, question, or whatever, is that certainly in the area where the entrances and the turning area was after during the Second World War, there were tanks there for aviation fuel. I'm just wondering, is there contaminated land there, or has that been dealt with? Thank you.
Tapalaisha vasje donlich. Jullie met het Morak Nikaragish. Record gesteld.
The kind of initial investigations do reveal hydrocarbon contamination, but the position with hydrocarbon contaminated soil is that unless it's a residential use, the preference is to retain that use on site, because it's not to retain the soil on site rather than take it anywhere. If it was a residential development, they would need to remove it to a licensed site, because of the nature of the use. It's not a requirement that soil is removed from the site. Some of it will be, if it is to be removed from the site, then it will need to be taken to a facility licensed to take contaminated soil. But they anticipate that for the most part, the soil will be retained to create some of the landscaping buds around the site.
Tabalaisha, Borak, Shuliarische fragration, vasje donlich. Klima, Tabalaisha, een goorlijke Francis Modochnish, Kerstakish.
Thank you very much, Convener. I'm looking at the picture, the visualization from above, which shows the new access road. And it seems to me that the new access road runs parallel to the existing road and I'm just wondering, does that mean if, let's hope not, but if there was some sort of health and safety incident and depending on the way the wind was blowing, both access roads, if it was a fire, would be equally inaccessible. And therefore you'd have people in the Coast Guards and the Newton Marina cut off and unable to get, away from the area if there was something happening there at the development.
Tapalaisha, en volgens de Wodi, Borak, Shukuri en Shachashit.
Yeah, I mean, that point was made in the representations that we received, and in the current guidance there is a recommendation of 2 points of access. in the guidance has been consulted on, it's not, it's absent on the requirement for 2 points of access. But what they are generally looking for is a site that could be accessed from different directions. So in this case, there would be, you're right, this access point to the north comes off the start of the causeway, and the other access point is to the south of the site. Now, the accesses that are, that are obviously within the control of the developer, but there is access, for example, round beyond the Coast Guard station to the south of the site, out with the land that's controlled by the developer, but there is access, and there is again a works compound of controlled by SSE, where there's another access to the back. So it isn't it isn't hemmed in by buildings. There are other ways to get to the site, but we do acknowledge that in terms of design, that is where the access is shown. We've asked that a finalised layout be provided as part of the conditions of the scheme, but that's one of the things that would need to be assessed through a finalised risk assessment. As I say, like, health and safety is not normally something that would fall to planning to deal with. It would be more the safety of the point of access to the public road.
Appalachian, Forakel, Keshnik, gonna Valdella, maar je is para show, hoorlijke in een tram met McLeod.
Thank you, Convener. I wasn't at planning yesterday, so I don't know much about what the discussion was going on. Just a question. I mean, in the town of Stornoway, and I'm pretty sure that we stopped a company in the past. I think we have from building because of too close to the gasworks and all that. Now we've got the gasworks, and then there's the oil depot, and now we're going to have the battery sort of station. Is that going to restrict? Is this battery station going to restrict other projects in the future?
Appalachia, waar je McLeod, Borak, Struckert.
To the best of our knowledge, there is no requirement for a safeguarding zone around these. Both the oil depot and the gas depot are subject to safeguarding by the Health and Safety Executive. The Health and Safety Executive in this case are not a regulator because it's not liquid. It doesn't come under COMA regulations. They're not acid batteries. I mean, the most used battery technology for these appliances nowadays is currently lithium-ion batteries, and they're apparently the batteries that are in widespread use in personal electronics such as mobile phones and laptops. The application states that it's the developer's intention to use that type of battery in the proposed development. And there are other types which are emerging, I think lithium sodium batteries, that are considered to be a more stable is the right word, but the technology is evolving all the time, and they're considered that they will eventually become mainstream. But while there's a risk, I don't anticipate that there will be any kind of safeguarding requirement around these. And it is the case that most of them will be located next to either a power station or a large substation, whether that's in the town or in the country.
Appalachia, Borak, wel cash, Tolsklors, als je vraagt dat. Okay. Wel, cash, things in Miele. Hoorlijke naar die doen nog.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Yeah, I'm a rock, so anything I point to Sandwich do is obviously okay by me.
Heb ik hier geen dingen?
Yeah, but there are several things that crop up in this, and I know Morag is only playing with the ball that's at her feet. This particular application for this site and no other considerations. So with that, I mean, that's the ball at the feet that the planning department are dealing with. So a couple of things though, and they've been raised by Councillor Mackenzie. I'm flabbergasted that the fire brigade are not a statutory consultee, given I think there's a pipeline comes along Newton with supplying diesel to a diesel-fired power station next to a residential area. We're talking about batteries, and we all know what we have issues with the control of battery fires. So again, I'm just a little bit amazed that the fire brigade weren't a statutory consultee, but you know, that's the case we're dealing with here. I can't help but think that the application is perfectly competent. We don't object to it, and it's going to be fine. It's going to be situated there. But going back to the converter station and its proposal for Marybank, and then the subsequent furore, and then it was moved to a different location that suits best. I can't help but think that the middle of Stornoway, as alluded to by Corax as well, you know, in the middle of, it was termed a blast zone, the gas works and the oil depot, etc., that it wouldn't be best sited where we are proposing most of our energy hub to be. I don't quite understand why it has to be slap bang in the middle of the Newton Basin. Again, it's not relevant to this particular consideration. It's possibly more relevant to Point Sandwich to maybe think it might be a better idea to put it out the Arnish Road somewhere. I do see that as a relevance, given its siting. But as Morag Ferguson is only dealing with the planning application she's got in front of her, very competently so, and it probably will get passed. But I think the wider consideration probably for PST would maybe be to consider thinking again. I'm not sure that there was a huge furore around it from the residents of the Newton area, but then again, how many of them were aware of the proposals before the original meeting? It's just it would seem to sit better outside of the Stornoway area, given its siting. I can see it looking. It looks like a match in the middle of a particularly flammable area. But safety considerations aside, it just seems to be the wrong fit for Stornoway.
Okay. Anyone else got any questions? Or Morag, do you want to come in there?
Just pick up on a couple of points from Councillor Roddy. First of all, because the development was a major development, there were 2 pre-application consultation meetings with the community, which were both advertised. And while I appreciate that maybe not everybody went along to those, they did meet the minimum requirements that are set out by planning legislation for such a development. The second point is really just one of clarification. The Health and Safety Executive were consulted in relation to the safeguarding for the pipeline, and so for the sites that are safeguarded, so that's the pipeline and the gasworks, and they did not object on those grounds. We wouldn't consult the fire service on the pipeline. It's the Health and Safety Executive would consult on those, and they didn't object. We consulted the Health and Safety Executive we consulted the fire service on the battery storage aspect, and they didn't respond because they're not required to do so. But in relation to the proximity of the proposed battery storage to the safeguarded assets, i.e. the gas depot and the pipeline, the Health and Safety Executive were consulted and didn't object.
Leva, tá bleise fóra go bhfuil ceist ag dingeile mar sin gona Ghnóirliche seoras modach an nuair an ghnóirliche donach amach leis.
Thank you. I think the very nature of these projects require them to be close to a power station. Indeed, to avoid the need of power failure. If there's a power failure or a power cut, the battery is there ready to take over Indeed, there was a power cut yesterday morning, albeit a short one. But if the batteries were, and this is my limited understanding, and I stand to be corrected, but if the batteries are situated a distance away from the power station, it's a huge loss in battery capacity, getting it back to the source. That's my understanding, that by their very nature, they need to be close to the power station. Thank you.
Okay, Glima, morgen tank, gewoon je modig. Hier gaan er gewoon je toch nog maar kneus.
Kieder kwad de project as show kwad die slaantje savelach agus geharig kwad de mis gronoten is tenne she had krakel shunt gemacht Josef agus a shunne de janu le dun je had tot shoot profession trader show agus kwad het ja de ga je hokkel aan de schachting had 3 turus wie had de sjunjasje as een ask son de tuve station kuach geschunnach a juchus kutjach agus mar sin get a gonige toonloch mach is het me gaat gedele mo an narni show fa de wilsje draast agus show hasinje jemishin kuatisch agus sule mi wonig gewarch kan chaisnach sé de honnesinn dat de chaing gapel of stichu tin taschen gewoon ski fuchen mi 3 plionnen dus Jogin va kwati kwach kunnen we de company Karlsnoch schon who got niet van kore plionnen gelees had to dat budget eket agus hanjel mijn amstukchen heb je insurance tolle vaak kalemach tuurlijk het wordt een morsan agus apo nog woord gaan company en ik wil kwach kan nu eigenlijk ieder chaisnach haul an an gausen agus an natchenelle fer a tortorbo noch kugus war scho tolle geologen an tachede kalkroasen tolle gemal tolle gin dat ik dus apo noch warach gan chaisnach as een nationch kuke de show a mis gema taich kul gan froche a show agus tortein kamora is nuppet meer fall gaat de janu de froche agus de froche dele agus fislige gehate dort gein agus tot malach kan roinnich as a horde so son nuppet glu ja de janu
Tapeleisje, als je figeneusje tingelle, als een schachs en caligra, kon je nog niet doen.
Yeah, thanks again. Yeah, thanks for the clarification from Councillor Murray about the proximity to the power station. I hadn't obviously thought through that having the batteries there to take over and possibly assist for generation capacity when the need is required. That's what it's there for. So I hadn't properly thought that aspect of it through. So I mean that's obviously the reason for the siting where it is. So my initial concerns about, would it be better somewhere else? Obviously, it needs to be where it's best sited, and that's obviously been the consideration for the planning application.
Kalima, tapeleisje, Nori, honige, Ray McConaughey.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, with regard to that last point that Councillor Murray has raised, I don't know. I'm not an expert. I certainly, he says he isn't either. So why did you bring it up? Yeah, as I say, I don't know whether it can be sited, half a mile away across the bay or whatever. But it doesn't alter my initial fears about the thing. Sorry. And I should say that Point and Sandwich Power, I acknowledge that they're doing a fantastic job, and I welcome their efforts, but not in this particular place.
Tapeleisje, als je McConaughey, je wel cash dingen semielle. Aan de hel, wel bij de kinderen, de mollen ik 3 point gehun, de kunenten en de menige aan de vastgeven gehun gaan neisk. Koninkje Rema Konig.
Yeah, well, in view of what I've said, I've got a mood against this. Unfortunately, it's purely on where it is. And
Okay.
I'm sorry that it hadn't been put somewhere else.
So als je kunt het close it. You're meer Derek McKay.
Yeah. Just to confirm, any amendment must be based on relevant planning grounds. So just looking to confirm the planning grounds. Is it siting and health and safety?
Yeah, citing health and safety and the fact that it's a danger to the surrounding community.
The next stage would be to seek any comments from the planning or legal advisor online if they have any, then confirm if there's a seconder, and then if you're minded, you may wish to invoke the timeout protocol to allow myself and the legal advisor to retire without any proposal on seconder, just to couch the amendment in competent planning terms.
Klima maar hier met aan nog een start gaan voor een teams hebben nog eens so is mogelijk is Joring Edison en Schach schon inschijn met große tangolige makonje gejaanu nur goed
Taplip, there's a conclusion.
Als je gaat gewoon gemaakt zo
Wel, dat komen ze graag op in de Gaelic nog wel aan de Sassa huis kunnen
Stoch redig huis paraal aan stoch om gaan een jaar brengen en mjole.
As in tuchte. Yeah, from what Councillor Mackenzie has set out, there's certainly planning grounds that could be put in a motion that could be put to a vote. So I'm happy if we were to use the timing protocol to use that opportunity to put that in a form of words that could be considered by the committee, by the Comhairle.
Wel dingen kunnen hij kritische honige, maar kon je honige gord modder.
Could I add that word in if you haven't written it out yet?
Well, I'm so confusing Fosh. Is you mission McKay and I'm so confusing Fosh also. Jake Minajan.
For about maybe 15
yeah,
minutes.
Social who are finishing Portugal and there's on gevangen de loste show die hele.
Yeah. The wording will reflect the planning grounds you've mentioned. If we just want to retire, if we could retire to committee room 1.
Agus fitching in the Russian film, Jake Minajan go cook. Leven gemaakt in was het had te kunnen.
The amendment is that the application be refused on the basis of potential health and safety implications.
Hoe je kon je nog brengen naar de mensen dat gewoon je nog wat brengen naar de Saskia de microfoon.
Okay. That the application be refused on the basis of potential health and safety implications of the proposed BESS facility on nearby housing, the HM Coast Guard Station and the causeway to a number of marine, industrial and processing uses on Goat Island. as the regulatory framework for BESS is still developing, and as the overall regulator picture remains unclear, the legitimate public concern over the potential fire risks arising from the location and the siting of this development is a material planning consideration of such weight that the application should be refused. Thank you.
Gleva, tapalaisha sa reisha the Christian Vaisha Modig. The father can ik bailish in Gilligol go Jespet, na welshing Gilligol cornered go vote. Okay.
So has anyone moved the recommendations in the report?
Cooper Horse in the Can you carry in a committee show na ear carry?
Well, it's up to any member to move.
The committee Jalabachi Sean Luas at the communion Cornyakan ye Holy Shores Mother.
Any member of the court can move it.
50 pounds me on a corner. Holy Shores Mother have lost the Molly vo the Molly had Bialu. Let take vo Holy Yamakaulai. Agus a glósid cúideach bealú van a chónliche réma conig le taich van a chónliche Gordon Murroch, van a hoort mi as je leest op corners gewoot. Gleef aan ha. Ja, oké. Gleef aan. So, just een keertje na hasje woorden. Na je kiesteen hoor je woorden. Een gesuerer microfoon kon kleinen ja een loine. Den du has je woorden. El suggestion schon vote goal.
Yeah. So the motion are the motion is the recommendations in the report by the chief executive, proposed by Councillor George Murray, seconded by Councillor Ian Macaulay, and the amendment just been circulated to all members and the email to everyone online has been proposed by Councillor Ray Mackenzie and seconded by Councillor Gordon Murray. So if you can make sure in the chamber you have your microphone on when call your name. So either say motion or amendment. Nach Gurram.
Motion.
Leader.
Motion.
Duncan McInnes, MBE.
Motion.
Kenneth John McLean.
Motion.
Ian A. McNeill. Ian A. McNeill. Ian M. MacLeod.
Motion.
Susan Thompson.
Motion.
Mustafa Hussain. Ushan Robertson.
Motion.
Paul Finnegan.
Motion.
Kenneth M. MacLeod. Kenny M.
Motion.
Robert Mackenzie.
Motion.
Angus Morrison.
Motion.
I think apologies from Ronald Friesen. Norman MacDonald.
Motion.
John Norman MacLeod had left the meeting part of the way through.
Motion.
Councillor McSween.
Yeah. Okay, so he should. Yeah,
not counting that,
no,
yeah.
okay.
Donald Crichton.
Motion.
Colin McLean.
Amendment.
Ian Macaulay. Malcolm K. MacDonald.
Motion.
Gordon Murray.
Amendment.
Ray Mackenzie.
Amendment.
As McCormick declared in interest. Dr. Francis Murray.
Amendment.
George Murray.
Motion.
And Norrie MacDonald.
Motion.
Sorry, what was that? Sorry, Ian Archie McNeil's just in the chat. He voted for the motion. That's 18 for the motion, 4 for the amendment.
Okay, glima tapalaisha. Agus rís mahaink go morak ni geragais Sean na haiskin seo chudi chéle Sean an na haiskin gema kudrumach agus wat faint op de fakkel wat an het dainok gíshoin Hulukal ma yen na het jolabach hier was seo agus niet de wallige bor ak son nopel chu isteach an agus kujoch nois na rakarú question popáil so tapel is richt da lá ma traim viait leis seo a sehat en so mor an teige richt. As je is go kusper hoog de chlaaroproch agus sin eisken cogunien na comedien sa George neuntig in de Mollien an de naisken cogunien agus sam si takrige agus nach taik sonne haisken coguni lennis. Hiet ver sé comedy fölum spors agus sileversin chlanje ga je gamal et gemarst sjouw la figet gan bias.
I move the committee to the decision report of Education, Sport and Children's Services Committee on the 26th of November 2024 for approval.
Lima tapalaisha le taik for Eugene Chauvin the committee in son taik for the Honige Fiona Stewart tapalaisha. In the committee lesachi shesvoch bonne kujoch ga gamal de Sheila Figit on Navin de gloset lesh charige.
Thank you, Convener. I move the committee decision report of the Sustainable Development Committee, which met on the 26th of November. Thank you.
Leva le taik bonne hier charige.
Taik firms.
Not die doen nog, maar een tank. Nach committee kontel agus puntstructure ga je gamal educating shackle figit an namin.
Ami a glós cogúnin comedy call agus punt structure son céan seachá fiche den dávíle agus céad aríchet.
De gloset leis charige en honige Usen Robertson. Agus le taik wa
I'm happy to second it, Chair, the convener.
Leis le taik van de honige Susan Nikomas. Nach committee hakin she committee policy agus storas ga je gamal de shakula figit an navin figit te kehet.
I move the committee decision report of the Policy and Resources Committee on the 27th November 2024.
De glost leis Janard le taik.
Mr. Taika.
On een jaar Janard dan nog een makneus tapeluisje. Is nach committee hakin she committee screw kon je gaan committee screw te ga je gamal nog laf figit kan having agus de gloset.
Thank you, Convener. I move the committee decision report of the Ordnance Scrutiny Committee, which was held on the 27th of November 2024.
De gloset le garige in us Moristan le taik.
I'll second that.
Van een jaar garige een honige kalm donloch maar een tankeridu. Husper na nou de chlaaroproch fis gloset agus a seo de chudisteach leis honige Francis Modoch le taik van honige Susan Thompson. Agus huidir fis gloset van honige Francis Modoch agus iorimi de honige Modoch lewe gemach fis gloset as you could heard.
Thanks, Convener. That the Comhairle believes that the UK government should fully reimburse the over 500 million added costs of employer national insurance contributions to the public and third sectors in Scotland as a result of the UK autumn statement, and that this should include full funding for Comhairle and Siar and every Scottish local authority, and recognises that if the Chancellor does not fully reimburse these costs, this will have a detrimental impact on the services the people of Scotland rely on, including here in Comhairle and Siar.
Gleimál holding counter is Mulligan Shaw. Gleimál Maha. Going here, Comhairle.
Sorry, just saying we told Angus he can come back.
He's on his way. Good job. Yes. Good job you thought of that. Sin mach leidin yn ish. Gleimál Maha. Húsbar Siarad efo'r headphones gyda yn ish. Hain siw dem I gra. Ys yw clwyntyn hem I gra nish. Gleimál. Húsbar y jech edrych lawr o broch. Sin Hwyl sy'n ffys glwysyd van de gewoonlijke gordon moddog, de teich van de gewoonlijke kalm Eilean, agus iori met de gewoonlijke gordon moddog, ffys glwysyd lewig ymach. Nice your
Sorry, Convener, that the Council, having taken full account of the petition signed by approximately 2,000 people regarding the opening of Tesco store in Stornoway on the Lord's Day, and also having taken into account the views of the Stornoway Community Council on the Lord's Day opening of the Tesco store, as well as recognising the strength of feeling expressed at the well-attended meeting in the Stornoway Town Hall on the 8th November on the question of the opening of Tesco on the Lord's Day, fully endorses and supports the views set out in the petition, the decision of the Stornoway Community Council and the unanimous opposition to Tesco opening at the public meeting held in the Town Hall, and recognises the division in the community caused by the decision by Tesco to open on the Lord's Day.
Tabellage van zijn wodig le taik. Gewoonlijk
I second that, Chair.
Gleimál. A cydioch aardig edrych yn y siach agos chai chyd Michael gobail na siach. No, ha gydioch dod Michael yn draste. Sy'n aardig gan y glwysyd mw Tesco agos ha Misha a chydwyd le taik van een jaar chanard gewoon ik het nog een makeneus. Leven maken aan de miola. The corner notes will regret the decision taken by the management of Tesco to open its premises in Stornoway on Sundays, and notes a strong feeling of many in the Lewis and Harris community against that decision. Notes that Tesco engaged in no consultation on a proposal other than with its own employees. Notes will regret the division which follows unrequested changes of this nature and calls on Tesco to reconsider its decision. Agus amish gyda'r sy'n le taik o'n y chwnnw dwi'n nog yn macanege.
Good taik yn y siw.
Tabellage.
Question would be is the move on to accept the amendment.
Yw'r sy'n fan sy'n modd i'ch John o'ch glan eisiau nawr o'ch.
Would have been good to have a bit more notice, but yeah, I'm happy. I read the amendment, and if the seconder is happy, we will withdraw our motion.
Yes, Chair. In the process, should we not have had this before now? Because this is a very rushed one, or should we have had even 2 minutes or 5 minutes to discuss it? I would have been appreciated. That I just actually saw it because Duncan Kinnis here had a copy of it and we didn't have a copy of it. Okay. I think the process should have been better handled than that. But I accept what Mr. Murray says.
Gleimál Maha. Tap live. As you zo'n holding John Clear Golsche Narge. Gleef am ha. Oeh, toen ik gutschkel kon je zeggen. Joch het blagen. Als je